More than half of British politicians have admitted to accepting bribes in their career, a shocking fact that sets the stage for our exploration today. We're delving into the murky underbelly of British politics, where corruption has been a persistent and insidious presence. This isn't a recent phenomenon, mind you. It's been woven into the very fabric of British political history, from the earliest days of the Magna Carta to the present. When we talk about political corruption, we refer to the misuse of public power for private gain. It's a betrayal of trust, a perversion of integrity, bribery, embezzlement, nepotism, cronyism and fraud. These are just a few of the many faces of corruption. Now, imagine these practices deeply entrenched in the system that governs a nation. In the context of British politics, this corruption has manifested in various forms. It's there in the unspoken alliances, the shadowy deals, the exchange of favours, and the revolving door between political power and corporate influence. It's there in the politicians who've admitted to accepting bribes, in the lack of transparency and the evasion of accountability. This corruption isn't just an ethical issue, it's a social issue, an economic issue, a legal issue. It undermines the very principles of democracy, distorts policymaking and fuels inequality. It's a corrosive force that eats away at the foundations of society, perpetuating a cycle of dishonesty, mistrust and disillusionment. But it doesn't end there. This corruption has also played a role in shaping gender politics. It's influenced legislation relating to women's rights and men's rights, casting a dark shadow over the fight for gender equality. As we delve deeper into the annals of British political history, we'll discover how this corruption has tainted the very institutions designed to protect us, how it's distorted the narrative of feminism, and how it continues to undermine the democratic process to this day. As we peel back the layers of British political history, the magnitude of the corruption becomes glaringly evident. In the year 1215, the Magna Carta was signed, marking the dawn of modern British politics. This great charter, sealed under King John of England, was a pivotal moment in history, serving as the cornerstone for the British political system that we know today. But what was the Magna Carta and why was it so significant? The Magna Carta, Latin for the Great Charter, was a document that established the principle that everyone, including the king, was subject to the law. It promised the protection of church rights, protection from illegal imprisonment, access to swift justice, and limitations on feudal payments to the crown. This was the first time that the power of the monarchy was checked by written law, setting the stage for a more balanced system of governance. However, like all great shifts in history, the Magna Carta was not without controversy. Its implementation was riddled with instances of corruption and power struggles. The king himself was not fully committed to the principles of the Charter. Instead, he used it as a political tool to appease his rebellious barons and regain their loyalty. Moreover, the Magna Carta was not a beacon of equality as it's often portrayed. Its benefits were primarily for the elites of society, the barons and the clergy, while the common folk remained largely unaffected. The Magna Carta was more about the redistribution of power rather than its equal distribution. Despite its shortcomings, the Magna Carta was a significant stride towards democracy. It laid the groundwork for the rule of law, a concept that's central to any democratic society. Over the centuries, it has influenced numerous constitutional documents, including the United States Constitution, symbolizing the universal yearning for human rights and justice. However, it's essential to remember that the Magna Carta was not a perfect document. It was a product of its time, reflecting the socio-political dynamics of the 13th century. The Magna Carta was a monumental step towards a democratic Britain, but its execution was far from flawless. The late 19th century saw the rise of feminism, a movement that promised equality but often delivered strife. Emerging from the suffrage movements of the late 1800s, feminism in Britain initially sought to redress the imbalance of power that left women without a political voice. The movement was fueled by a burning desire for equality and a need to challenge the status quo. But like many movements that spring from righteous indignation, it was not without its darker sides. As the movement gained momentum, some factions resorted to acts of violence and extremism to further their cause. The suffragettes, for instance, were known for their militant tactics. They smashed windows, set fire to post boxes, and even bombed public buildings in their quest for women's suffrage. Such acts, while driven by a desire for equality, created a climate of fear and division in the society. The struggle for women's rights also saw the rise of extremist ideologies that threatened to overshadow the noble pursuit of equality. Radical feminism, for instance, sought not just equality, but the dismantling of the entire patriarchal system. This often led to a demonization of men and a denial of the very real issues they faced. The rise of feminism also unleashed a torrent of social changes that were not always beneficial. The push for women's liberation often came at the expense of traditional family structures. While freeing women from the constraints of domesticity, it also led to a breakdown of familial ties and the erosion of community values. Moreover, the feminist movement's emphasis on individual rights sometimes overshadowed the importance of social responsibility. This focus on the self over the collective had profound implications for society, leading to a culture of entitlement and a disregard for communal harmony. While the feminist movement has undoubtedly made strides towards equality, its history is marred by instances of discord and violence. Feminism is indeed a double-edged sword. It has brought about much-needed change, but it has also caused strife and division. As we move forward, it is important to remember this complex history and strive for a feminism that promotes true equality, without resorting to extremism or violence. Feminist legislation, while aiming to protect women, has often resulted in unintended negative consequences. Take, for instance, the Domestic Violence, Crime and Victims Act of 2004. While it was designed with the noble intention of safeguarding women from domestic abuse, it has inadvertently created a dangerous imbalance. The Act is often criticized for its gender bias, as it primarily focuses on the protection of women, leaving men who are victims of domestic abuse without equivalent legal recourse. Then there's the Gender Recognition Act of 2004. This act allows individuals to legally change their gender. However, it has been criticized for potentially facilitating the invasion of women-only spaces, such as restrooms and locker rooms, by individuals who may not have sincere intentions. The Act, though aimed at promoting gender equality, has inadvertently given rise to new forms of gender-based discrimination. Similarly, the Equality Act of 2010, which prohibits discrimination based on gender, has paradoxically resulted in reverse discrimination. The Act's emphasis on positive discrimination, or affirmative action, has sometimes led to situations where men are overlooked for promotions or job opportunities in favor of less qualified women, just to fulfill gender quotas. And while laws like the Sex Discrimination Act of 1975 were put in place to protect women from discrimination, they have also been used to justify preferential treatment of women in areas such as family law. This has led to an imbalance in custody battles, where men often find themselves at a disadvantage, regardless of their suitability as parents. The irony here is that legislation intended to promote gender equality has, in many instances, tipped the scales in the opposite direction. The societal implications of this imbalance are profound and far-reaching. Men are increasingly feeling marginalized and disenfranchised, leading to a rise in male mental health issues and suicide rates. The road to equality is a complex one, and the current legislative landscape reflects this complexity and its inherent challenges. As we strive for gender equality, it's crucial to remember that true equality means equal rights, responsibilities and protection for all, regardless of gender. Fast forward to 2023 and the landscape of British politics is still deeply scarred by corruption. Let's peel back the layers of this grim reality. The last few years have been marred by scandals, each more disheartening than the last. From allegations of misused public funds to the murky waters of political lobbying, these instances of corruption have left a stain on the political sphere that seems increasingly difficult to scrub clean. Take a moment to consider the implications of such behaviour. It's not merely a matter of dishonest politicians lining their pockets, it's the erosion of public trust, it's the silencing of democracy, it's the perpetuation of inequality. When corruption thrives, It's the ordinary citizens who are left to bear the brunt. But it's not just the scandals that are concerning, it's the everyday systemic corruption that often goes unnoticed, the intertwining of business and politics, the revolving door between government and private sector, the influence of money in policy making. These are not isolated incidents, but rather symptoms of a disease that has taken root in the very heart of our political system. What's more, it's the marginalized groups who are most vulnerable to the effects of corruption. Women, in particular, often find themselves on the sharp end of this stick, whether it's through discriminatory laws, unequal representation, or the perpetuation of harmful stereotypes. Corruption serves to further entrench the barriers that women face in society. And let's not forget about the men either. While we've seen strides made in terms of men's rights, corruption continues to hinder progress. From issues of custody rights to the stigma surrounding mental health, corruption serves to perpetuate these problems, often at the expense of progress and fairness. Despite advancements in transparency and accountability, corruption remains a deeply entrenched issue in British politics. It's a bleak picture indeed, but only by acknowledging the scale of the problem can we begin to dream of a solution. The cost of corruption in British politics is not just financial, but it's eroding the very fabric of British society. Let's delve into the magnitude of this cost. Corruption, in essence, is a betrayal of trust. And when it seeps into the political landscape, it undermines the very pillars of democracy. It's like termites gnawing at the foundations of a house, invisible to the eye but causing insurmountable damage. The social cost of this corruption is enormous. It breeds disillusionment and cynicism among the populace. Trust, the bedrock of any society, is eroded, leading to an increasing sense of alienation. Citizens feeling unheard and unrepresented may even disengage from political processes that should, in a healthy democracy, be participatory. The economic cost is equally staggering. Corruption diverts resources from essential public services, creating an uneven playing field where the few benefit at the expense of the many. When public funds are misappropriated, the ripple effects are felt by every British citizen. It's the schools that lack resources, the hospitals that are understaffed, the roads that are left unrepaired, and the public services that are left wanting. Politically, corruption undermines the legitimacy of the democratic process. It breeds inequality as it provides a means for the powerful to maintain their power and wealth, often at the expense of the marginalized and disenfranchised. This is particularly true when we consider the gendered impacts of corruption. Women, who have historically been underrepresented in politics, are disproportionately affected, their voices drowned out in a system that is rigged against them. But the cost isn't just in pounds and pence, in disillusioned citizens and skewed political landscapes. The cost is also in the potential that is lost. The innovative ideas that are never heard, the voices that are silenced, the progress that is stalled. In the end, the price of corruption is steep, and it's a burden shouldered by every British citizen. The cost of corruption is the erosion of the democratic ideals that Great Britain was built upon, and it's a bill that none of us can afford to pay. Our journey through the annals of British political history reveals a troubling narrative. From the inception of the Magna Carta, the birth of British politics, we've charted a course through centuries of power struggles and policy changes. We've seen how the rights of individuals, women and men alike, were often sidelined in the pursuit of power and control. The rise of feminism, a movement that promised to champion the rights of women, proved to be a double-edged sword. While it brought about much-needed changes in the law protecting women's rights, it also bore witness to violent acts carried out under the banner of women's rights. This darker side of feminism cannot be ignored, as it has left scars on the face of British politics and society. The feminist legislation, intended to protect and empower women, had its own set of pitfalls. It sometimes failed to consider the rights of men, leading to a skewed balance. The legislative arena became a battlefield, where the rights of one group were often promoted at the expense of another. Fast forward to the present year, 2023, the picture remains bleak. The corruption in British politics, like a malignant growth, continues to eat away at the fabric of society. The scant regard for the rule of law, the blatant misuse of power, and the persistent inequality are disheartening. The very institutions that were designed to uphold justice and fairness are being manipulated for personal gains. The cost of this corruption is heavy. It erodes trust, stifles progress, and undermines the democratic principles upon which the nation was built. It's a price that is too high to pay, and yet seems to be the norm in the current political landscape. As we gaze upon the tapestry of British politics, we must confront the stains of corruption and the shadows cast by the darker side of feminism. It is only by acknowledging these issues that we can begin to address them and work towards a more balanced and just society.